Ethan Morrison stood at the large windows of his restaurant, the Grand Cuisine, gazing out at the bustling New York City streets. The rhythmic hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people walking by filled the air. Inside, the soft clinking of silverware and the occasional murmur of satisfied diners echoed through the elegant, dimly lit dining room. The restaurant had come to symbolize his success, a reflection of the years of hard work and determination that had brought him to this point. The Grand Cuisine was not just any restaurant. It had become one of the most prestigious dining establishments in the city, known for its exquisite dishes and impeccable service. Ethan's journey, however, had been anything but glamorous. Every time he took a moment to look around at the polished marble floors, the lavish decor, and the neatly dressed waitstaff moving with precision, he was reminded of the stark contrast between his present life and the humble beginnings from which he had come. He hadn't always been surrounded by wealth and sophistication. Ethan had grown up in the tough, unforgiving streets of Brooklyn, far from the glittering lights of the Manhattan skyline. Raised by his Aunt Margaret after the tragic death of his parents, Ethan's childhood was marked by a constant struggle to get by. Margaret was a hard-working woman, but the odds were always stacked against them. She worked long hours as a house cleaner, often returning home exhausted, but always with a warm smile for Ethan. Life was tough, but they made do with what little they had. Their small, cramped apartment had thin walls, and the sound of their neighbors arguing or the clatter of footsteps in the hallway was a constant reminder of the poverty surrounding them. Despite the hardships, there was always one place that felt like a sanctuary for Ethan: the kitchen. It was in that small, cluttered kitchen where his love for cooking was born. Margaret, though not formally trained, had a gift for turning the simplest ingredients into something comforting and delicious. She often told Ethan that cooking was more than just a way to fill their bellies. It was a way to nourish the soul. Watching her work magic with the few ingredients they could afford left a lasting impression on young Ethan. He would stand by her side, wide-eyed, as she mixed flour with water to make dough or threw together whatever vegetables they had into a pot to create a hearty soup. "Cooking isn't about fancy recipes," Margaret would say with a gentle smile. "It's about heart. If you put love into what you make, people will feel it." Those words stayed with Ethan long after he outgrew the small kitchen of his aunt's apartment. He didn't realize it then, but those early lessons were the foundation of what would later become his passion and career. Still, their situation was far from easy. There were days when the cupboards were nearly bare, and Margaret had to make difficult choices between paying bills and buying groceries. She worked tirelessly to make sure Ethan had what he needed, but the weight of their financial struggles often showed in her tired eyes. There were moments when Ethan would see her sit quietly at the small kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly as if in silent prayer, worrying about how to make ends meet. Yet even in those moments of difficulty, there was resilience. Ethan admired his aunt's strength, and over time, that same resilience grew within him. The love and care Margaret showed in every meal they shared, no matter how simple, planted the seed of Ethan's dream to one day become a chef. It wasn't about the fame or the accolades. It was about creating something that could bring joy to others, just as his aunt's meals had brought comfort to him. As Ethan grew older, he took on part-time jobs, saving up every dollar he could to help his aunt and to one day attend culinary school. The road to success was long and filled with challenges, but he never forgot where he had come from or the lessons his aunt had taught him. His rise to prominence in the culinary world wasn't just a story of talent or hard work. It was a story of perseverance, love, and the unshakable belief that food could change lives. Now, years later, as the owner of the Grand Cuisine, Ethan's name was synonymous with luxury dining. His restaurant catered to the city's elite, from celebrities to influential business figures. Reservations were booked months in advance, and his menus were featured in top culinary magazines. Despite the acclaim, Ethan remained grounded. He often reflected on how far he had come, but he never allowed success to cloud his memory of the hardships he had faced or the people who had helped him along the way. The memory of his aunt was always with him, guiding him in the way he ran his restaurant and treated others. The kitchen of the Grand Cuisine was worlds apart from the one in which he had first learned to cook, but the heart behind the work was the same. Ethan's journey had been one of transformation, but it was a transformation rooted in the values of love, compassion, and humility. Those were the things that had sustained him through the hardest times, and they were what continued to drive him now. Ethan's success wasn't just a personal achievement, it was a testament to the power of resilience and the impact of kindness. Looking out at the city he now called home, he knew that no matter how far he had come, his past would always be a part of him, shaping every decision he made, every meal he prepared, and every opportunity he gave to others. The hustle and bustle of a typical evening at the Grand Cuisine was in full swing. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays laden with dishes that were not only expertly crafted but artistically plated. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the faces of diners, each of them immersed in conversation or savoring the culinary delights that had made Ethan Morrison's restaurant the talk of the town. For Ethan, overseeing his team and ensuring everything ran smoothly had become second nature. The kitchen was his domain, a well-oiled machine where every member knew their role and executed it with precision. Yet, despite the success, there was a part of Ethan that always kept a foot in the past. He often found himself gazing out the front windows, looking beyond the polished glass and into the streets where a different kind of life was unfolding, one that he was all too familiar with. It was during one of these moments, while standing near the entrance to his restaurant and looking out into the world beyond, that he first noticed the boy. Dressed in ragged, oversized clothes, the child couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old. He stood on the sidewalk, not far from the entrance, his small frame hunched against the cool evening breeze. A box of snacks, likely purchased in bulk from a discount store, hung from his shoulder by a fraying strap. He was selling the snacks to anyone who passed by, calling out in a voice that was both assertive and pleading. Ethan's eyes followed the boy as he moved among the pedestrians, offering his goods to anyone willing to listen. Most people passed him by without so much as a glance, caught up in their own lives and hurried conversations. A few spared him a dismissive wave, while others gave him a brief, apologetic smile before continuing on their way. Ethan recognized that look, the way people tried to politely ignore the struggling, pretending they didn't see the need right in front of them. It was a look Ethan had seen countless times in his youth, and it stirred something deep inside him. The boy's resilience in the face of constant rejection struck a chord with Ethan. There was something in the boy's eyes that reminded him of himself at that age, hungry not just for food, but for a chance, for hope, for something better. Ethan had been that boy once, hustling on the streets of Brooklyn, trying to make a little money to help Aunt Margaret. He knew what it was like to feel invisible, to be working so hard yet still on the outside, looking in. Unable to ignore the tug at his heart, Ethan stepped outside, the cool air hitting his face as he approached the boy. The child didn't notice him at first, too focused on trying to flag down another passerby. Ethan watched for a moment, taking in the scene. The boy's clothes were worn, his shoes barely held together at the seams, and his face, though young, bore the signs of someone who had already seen too much hardship. It was clear he wasn't just out here for pocket money. This was survival. "Hey kid," Ethan called out softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy turned, his eyes widening slightly as he looked up at the tall man in the chef's uniform standing before him. "Yeah?" the boy replied, his voice cautious but curious. Ethan offered a small smile. "What's your name?" "Jared," the boy said after a brief hesitation, as if unsure whether to trust this stranger. He shifted his weight nervously, clearly not accustomed to people stopping to ask him questions. Ethan nodded. "Nice to meet you, Jared. You hungry?" The boy blinked, thrown off by the question. His eyes darted to the restaurant behind Ethan, its polished exterior and elegant facade a stark contrast to the world Jared lived in. He hesitated, glancing down at the box of snacks, as if unsure how to respond. His pride, or maybe just his instinct to survive, seemed to war with the obvious answer to Ethan's question. "I'm good," Jared finally mumbled, his voice unconvincing. Ethan could see through the bravado. He recognized that defensive shield, the one that said, "I don't need help," even when the hunger gnawed at your insides. It was the same shield he had worn for years. But he also knew that offering charity outright would only make the boy more guarded. "Well," Ethan said, keeping his tone light, "if you're ever interested in grabbing a hot meal, I run this place." He gestured to the restaurant behind him. "You're welcome any time. No strings attached." Jared's eyes flicked toward the restaurant again, lingering this time. He swallowed, but the guarded look in his eyes remained. "I'm fine," he repeated, more firmly this time, though his gaze betrayed the struggle inside him. Ethan didn't push. He simply nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small business card with the restaurant's name and logo embossed on it. "Here," he said, offering the card. "If you ever change your mind, just come on in and show this to anyone at the front. They'll know what to do." Jared took the card hesitantly, eyeing it like it was some kind of trick, but he didn't refuse it. Instead, he slipped it into the pocket of his worn jacket, nodding his thanks before turning back toward the street, ready to continue his hustle. Ethan watched as Jared walked away, his small figure disappearing into the crowd. The encounter lingered in his mind long after he returned to the restaurant. Something about the boy stayed with him, a nagging sense that this was more than just a chance meeting. There was something about Jared, something that reminded Ethan of the hungry, scrappy kid he had once been. He couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. Later that evening, as the last of the dinner crowd filtered out of the Grand Cuisine and the staff began cleaning up, Ethan found himself staring out the window again, wondering if Jared would come back. He knew better than most how pride could keep someone from accepting help, even when they desperately needed it. But he also knew that sometimes a single act of kindness could be the difference between despair and hope. Ethan had been fortunate. He had encountered people along the way who had given him a chance, people who had believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself. Now, standing in the restaurant that had become a symbol of his success, he couldn't help but feel that it was his turn to be that person for someone else. Whether Jared would take that chance was still uncertain, but Ethan had already made up his mind. If the boy ever walked through those doors again, he would be ready to help. A few days passed, and life at the Grand Cuisine continued its usual rhythm. The restaurant was booked solid as always, the kitchen running with precision, and Ethan maintained his steady presence, overseeing every detail. Despite the busy routine, his thoughts kept drifting back to the boy, Jared. He wondered if Jared was still out there, selling snacks on the cold streets, struggling to make ends meet. He hoped that the boy would find the courage to come back, but he also knew that sometimes pride and fear could keep someone from accepting help. It was a quiet evening when Ethan saw him again. The dinner rush had just started to slow, and the restaurant's warm, inviting glow spilled out onto the sidewalk. Ethan was at the hostess stand, checking the reservations for the night, when he glanced out the large windows. There, standing in the same spot as before, was Jared. The boy wasn't selling snacks this time. Instead, he stood there, looking at the restaurant with a mixture of hesitation and curiosity, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his oversized jacket. Ethan's heart gave a small, hopeful jolt. He set down the reservation list and walked toward the entrance, pushing open the heavy glass doors and stepping out into the cool night air. Jared saw him immediately and straightened, his face tense with uncertainty. He didn't run, but he also didn't make any move toward the restaurant. He just stood there, eyes flicking nervously from Ethan to the ground and back again. "Hey, Jared," Ethan said, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "Good to see you again." Jared didn't respond right away. He shifted on his feet, his thin shoulders hunched as if he were trying to make himself smaller. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You said I could come in for a meal." Ethan smiled, nodding. "I did, and the offer still stands. You hungry?" The boy hesitated for just a moment before giving a single, sharp nod. Ethan stepped aside and held the door open for him. "Come on in," he said. Jared glanced at the door, then at Ethan, as if he were weighing whether or not to trust him. After what felt like an eternity, the boy took a tentative step forward, then another, until he crossed the threshold into the warm, welcoming space of the restaurant. The soft glow of candlelight and the hum of quiet conversation filled the room, and for a moment, Jared looked overwhelmed. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the elegant decor and the beautifully set tables. It was clear this was a world he had never been part of, a place where he felt he didn't belong. Sensing his discomfort, Ethan gestured toward a quieter corner of the restaurant, away from the more formal dining area. "Let's sit over here," he suggested, leading Jared to a small table tucked away from the main crowd. It wasn't one of the usual tables reserved for high-profile guests, but it was cozy, with a good view of the kitchen. Jared followed silently, his eyes still wide, and sat down in the chair Ethan pulled out for him. Once Jared was seated, Ethan motioned to one of his staff. "Get us a couple of menus," he said. Then, turning back to Jared, he smiled. "You can order whatever you want. This meal's on the house." Jared looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the linen napkin. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with suspicion. Ethan sat down across from him, resting his arms on the table. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "I know what it's like to struggle, and I know how hard it is to ask for help. But you don't have to feel like you owe me anything. Sometimes it's okay to just accept a little kindness." The boy didn't say anything, but his shoulders seemed to relax slightly as the waitress arrived with 2 menus. She set them down in front of Jared and Ethan, giving Ethan a small, questioning glance. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod, and she smiled warmly before walking away. Jared picked up the menu, staring at it as if it were written in a foreign language. The dishes listed on the page were unlike anything he had ever eaten before. The names were elegant, the descriptions intricate. He swallowed hard, unsure of what to choose, but too proud to admit he didn't understand what most of it meant. Sensing his discomfort, Ethan leaned in slightly. "If you're not sure what to order, I can make a suggestion," he offered gently. "How do you feel about pasta?" Jared nodded slowly. "Pasta's good," he mumbled. Ethan smiled. "Great. I'll have them make you our special tonight. Spaghetti with a rich marinara sauce and meatballs. It's one of my personal favorites." Jared didn't argue, just nodded again, still looking slightly out of place. Ethan motioned to the waitress once more and placed the order, making sure Jared got a drink and a side of warm, freshly baked bread. As they waited for the food to arrive, the awkward silence hung between them for a moment. Ethan could tell the boy was still unsure, still holding back. He didn't want to push too hard, but he knew that opening up would take time. "So," Ethan said after a while, "how long have you been selling snacks out there?" Jared shrugged, his gaze focused on the table in front of him. "A while," he muttered, "just trying to make some money. My mum, she's sick, and we need it." Ethan nodded, listening carefully. "That's tough," he said, keeping his tone soft. "It can't be easy trying to take care of her and yourself." Jared's eyes flicked up to meet Ethan's for a moment, and there was a flash of something, maybe vulnerability, maybe frustration, before he looked away again. "It's fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We get by." Ethan didn't press further, sensing that Jared wasn't ready to reveal more just yet. But even in those few words, Ethan could hear the weight of the burden the boy carried. It was too much for someone his age. Far too much for someone who should be enjoying school and friends, not worrying about where the next meal would come from or how to take care of a sick parent. The food arrived soon after, and Jared's eyes widened as the plate was set in front of him. The rich aroma of the marinara sauce and the perfectly cooked pasta seemed to momentarily break through his tough exterior. He hesitated only a second before picking up his fork and taking a bite. The moment the food hit his taste buds, something shifted. His guarded expression softened just a little as he ate in silence. It was clear he hadn't had a meal like this in a long time, maybe ever. Ethan watched quietly, content to let the boy eat in peace. He didn't rush the conversation, knowing that sometimes the best way to earn someone's trust was through patience and understanding. As Jared ate, Ethan felt a familiar warmth spread through him, the kind of warmth that came from knowing you were making a difference, even in the smallest way. When the meal was nearly finished, Jared finally looked up, his eyes meeting Ethan's across the table. "Thanks," he said quietly, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. It was genuine, a small crack in the wall he had built around himself. Ethan smiled. "You're welcome, Jared. Anytime." He paused for a moment, then added, "And if you ever want to come back, whether for another meal or just to talk, you know where to find me." Jared didn't respond right away, but Ethan could see the wheels turning in his head. There was a part of him that wanted to trust, that wanted to believe in the possibility of something better. But trust, Ethan knew, wasn't something you earned in a single meal. It was something that took time. As Jared stood to leave, Ethan handed him a small bag with a few extra loaves of bread and some pastries. "For you and your mum," he said simply. Jared took the bag, nodding his thanks again before turning to walk toward the door. As Ethan watched him go, disappearing into the night, he couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something important. There was more to Jared's story, more that he wanted to help with. He just hoped that one day soon the boy would return, ready to open up and allow Ethan to offer the help he so clearly needed. Until then, Ethan would wait, knowing that sometimes even the smallest gesture of kindness could plant the seeds for something much greater. Several days passed, and Ethan found himself thinking about Jared more often than he expected. There was something about the boy, a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of toughness and independence, that reminded him of his own youth. Ethan knew that someone like Jared wouldn't let his guard down easily, especially not after years of having to fend for himself in a world that offered little kindness. But Ethan had seen the boy's hesitation before he left the restaurant that night, the brief flicker of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. Jared wasn't used to help, but deep down, Ethan could sense he longed for it. It was late in the evening when Jared came back, just as the last of the customers were finishing their desserts and the staff were beginning to clean up for the night. Ethan was at his usual spot near the kitchen, checking over the final orders when one of his waitstaff approached him. "There's a boy outside asking for you," she said quietly, a look of curiosity crossing her face. Ethan didn't have to ask who it was. He wiped his hands on his apron and nodded. "Thanks. I'll take care of it." Stepping out of the kitchen, he spotted Jared standing awkwardly by the entrance. The boy looked different this time, still wearing the same worn-out clothes, still clutching his bag of snacks, but his posture seemed less guarded. He looked tired, and there was a nervous energy about him, as though he was wrestling with something internally. Ethan approached him slowly, offering a warm smile. "Hey, Jared. Glad to see you again. Everything okay?" Jared shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding eye contact for a moment. Then, with a small, resigned sigh, he finally looked up. "I was wondering—" His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard before continuing. "I was wondering if I could bring my mum here for dinner. She's been real sick, and I thought I don't know, maybe it would cheer her up or something." The words tumbled out of him in a rush, as though he'd been holding them back for days. Ethan could hear the hope, fragile and tentative, in Jared's voice. It wasn't just about the meal, it was about trying to do something good for his mother, to give her a small moment of happiness in what was clearly a difficult life. Ethan's heart softened at the request. He remembered what it was like to want to do something special for someone you loved, but feeling powerless to make it happen. He smiled gently and nodded. "Of course you can bring her. How about tomorrow evening? I'll set up a special table for you two." Jared's eyes flickered with relief, though he still seemed unsure, as if he wasn't used to things going his way. "Really? You'd do that?" "Absolutely," Ethan replied, keeping his tone casual but sincere. "You don't have to worry about a thing. Just bring your mom and we'll take care of the rest. It'll be our pleasure." Jared didn't say much after that, but the weight of his gratitude was visible in his expression. He nodded once, almost stiffly, and murmured a quiet, "Thanks," before turning to leave. Ethan watched him go, feeling a mixture of anticipation and concern. Whoever this woman was, Jared's mother, she was clearly someone important to the boy. The way Jared spoke about her, with that mix of worry and protectiveness, told Ethan that their bond was strong, even if life had been unkind to them both. The next day, Ethan made sure everything was perfect. He instructed the staff to prepare one of the coziest corners of the restaurant, setting up a table near the window where the soft glow of evening light would filter in. He didn't want the setting to be too formal or intimidating, knowing that Jared and his mother might not feel comfortable in the usual grandeur of the restaurant. Instead, he focused on creating a warm, inviting space where they could relax and enjoy a meal together. As the time approached for their arrival, Ethan found himself feeling a strange sense of anticipation. He had hosted countless dinners in his career, serving high-profile guests and celebrities. But something about this evening felt different. There was something more personal at stake, though Ethan wasn't entirely sure why he felt that way. Maybe it was because Jared reminded him so much of himself, scrappy, determined, and trying to hold everything together for the sake of someone he loved. Or maybe it was because Ethan knew that behind every struggling kid, there was often a story much deeper than what met the eye. The moment Jared walked through the door with his mother, Ethan felt the air shift. He had expected to see a frail woman worn down by illness and hardship, but nothing could have prepared him for the shock of recognition that hit him like a wave. The woman standing next to Jared wasn't a stranger. She was someone from his past, someone whose influence had shaped the very course of his life. Her name was Olivia. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as memories from years ago flooded back. Olivia had been his mentor when he was just starting out in the culinary world, a guiding light during a time when he had felt lost and uncertain about his future. She had been the one who believed in his potential, even when no one else did, pushing him to follow his passion and hone his skills. She had given him his first real break, helping him land his first job in a restaurant kitchen. And then, as life sometimes does, they had lost touch. Time had passed, and Ethan's career had taken him on a whirlwind journey that eventually led to the success he now enjoyed. But Olivia had vanished from his life, and he had always wondered what had become of her. Now, here she was, standing in his restaurant, looking older and more fragile than he remembered, but still unmistakably the same woman who had once changed his life. Ethan's shock must have been visible because Olivia, too, paused when she saw him. Her eyes, though tired and worn from years of struggle, widened with recognition. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jared, standing beside her, looked between them, confused. You know each other?" Ethan nodded slowly, still processing the moment. "Yeah, Jared. Your mum. She's the reason I'm where I am today." Olivia smiled, though it was a sad, wistful smile, as if she too was remembering the years that had passed. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly, her voice betraying both surprise and the weight of everything she had been through. "I didn't even know. This was your place." Ethan quickly stepped forward, his surprise giving way to concern. "What happened, Olivia? How did you end up here like this?" She sighed, glancing at Jared, who was still trying to make sense of the situation. "It's a long story," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Life hasn't been easy. After my husband died, things just fell apart. I tried to keep everything together for Jared, but..." Her voice faltered, and she looked down, clearly unwilling to burden Ethan with all the details. Ethan felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest. Olivia had been the one to help him when he had nothing, and now she was the one in need. He knew in that moment that he couldn't let her continue to struggle, not when he was in a position to make things better for her and Jared. "We'll talk more later," Ethan said gently, placing a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "But for now, let's just enjoy this meal. I want tonight to be about you and Jared." Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Jared, still processing everything, glanced between his mother and Ethan with a look of bewilderment. He had come here hoping to give his mother a small moment of happiness, but it seemed like something much larger was happening, something that would change their lives in ways he hadn't anticipated. As they sat down at the table Ethan had prepared for them, the warmth of the restaurant seemed to wrap around them like a comforting embrace. The conversation started slow, with both Jared and Olivia still adjusting to the shock of their unexpected reunion with Ethan. But as the food arrived, carefully crafted by Ethan's team with special attention to every detail, the tension began to melt away. Jared smiled for the first time in what felt like years as he watched his mother eat, her face lighting up at the familiar flavors that Ethan had carefully chosen to remind her of better times. For the first time in a long while, it seemed like the weight of the world had lifted, if only for a moment. And in that moment, as laughter and memories filled the air, Ethan knew that this dinner was only the beginning of something far more important. Something that would bring not just food to the table, but hope, healing, and a chance for new beginnings. The evening had already been a whirlwind of emotions, but as the dinner went on, a deeper, more profound shift was about to unfold. Ethan sat with Olivia and Jared, the three of them bound by an invisible thread that connected their pasts, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. The meal, which was meant to be a simple act of kindness for Jared and his mother, had transformed into something far more significant, a reunion that neither Ethan nor Olivia had seen coming. As the conversation drifted, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at Olivia, still in disbelief at the circumstances that had brought them back together. The years had not been kind to her. She looked worn, her once vibrant eyes dimmed by the weight of hardship. Her hands, which Ethan remembered being so deft in the kitchen, were now thin and lined with age, a testament to the struggles she had endured. But there was still something undeniably strong about her, a quiet resilience that shone through even in her tiredness. He wanted to ask so many questions, but the words felt heavy on his tongue. Instead, they sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, letting the weight of the past and present settle around them. Jared, clearly sensing the significance of the evening, but not fully understanding it, busied himself with the dessert Ethan had insisted they try, a decadent chocolate soufflé that was one of the restaurant's signature dishes. The boy had barely spoken since the revelations of the night, his mind likely racing to piece together the connection between his mother and the successful chef sitting across from them. Ethan leaned back in his chair, finally breaking the silence. "It's been a long time, Olivia," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see you like this." Olivia sighed, her eyes dropping to her lap as she fiddled with the edge of the linen napkin. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, does it? Her voice was laced with both sadness and acceptance, as if she had long ago resigned herself to the way things had turned out. "After my husband passed, everything just unraveled. I tried, Ethan. I tried to keep things together, for Jared, for myself, but it wasn't enough." Her words were like a punch to Ethan's gut. He could hear the guilt in her voice, the same guilt he had felt in his own life when he couldn't do more to help his Aunt Margaret when she struggled. He knew that feeling all too well, the weight of responsibility, the pressure of trying to hold everything together when the world seemed to be crumbling around you. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice low. "I had no idea. I should have kept in touch. I should have—" Olivia shook her head, cutting him off gently. "No, Ethan, don't apologize. You've done so much with your life. I'm proud of you, really. I didn't expect anything from you. Life took us in different directions, that's all." But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more, that he owed her something beyond just a meal. This woman had been a pillar in his life when he was at his most vulnerable. She had seen potential in him when others had dismissed him as just another kid from the streets. She had pushed him, taught him, believed in him. And now, here she was, struggling just to get by, while he had built an empire in the world she had once introduced him to. "I owe you everything," Ethan said, his voice catching slightly. "You were the one who gave me a shot when no one else would. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I've never forgotten that." Olivia's eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "You didn't owe me anything, Ethan. You were always going to make it. I just gave you a little nudge." But Ethan couldn't accept that. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he spoke with a quiet intensity. "It wasn't just a nudge. You changed the course of my life, Olivia. And now it's my turn to help you." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, her smile faltering as she shook her head. "No, Ethan, I don't want charity. We're doing okay. Jared and we're managing." Ethan glanced at Jared, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, clearly unsure of what to say or how to feel. The boy was caught between two worlds, his mother's pride and the reality of their struggles. It was obvious that they weren't managing, as Olivia had said. Jared's gaunt frame, the exhaustion in his mother's face, the worn-out clothes, they were all signs of a family barely hanging on. But Ethan understood where Olivia was coming from. Pride was a powerful thing, especially for someone who had spent their life working hard, never asking for a handout. "I know you're proud, Olivia," Ethan said gently, "but this isn't about charity, it's about helping a friend. You helped me when I needed it, and now I want to do the same for you." Jared shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking down at his empty plate. He had probably never heard anyone talk to his mother this way before, offering more than just fleeting kindness, but a real lifeline, a tangible solution to their problems. He cleared his throat, speaking up for the first time since their conversation had taken this turn. "Mum, maybe we should, listen to him. We could use the help." Olivia's eyes softened as she looked at her son, the weight of their situation clear in both of their expressions. She hesitated, clearly struggling with the decision to accept Ethan's offer. There was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken tension, before she finally spoke. "What are you suggesting, Ethan?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "First, I want to help you get the medical care you need. I know you've been struggling with your health, and I have connections that can make sure you get the best care available. No more waiting, no more uncertainty. I'll cover everything." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. "And Jared, he deserves a chance to focus on school, not worrying about where the next meal will come from or how to take care of you. I can help with that too. I'll make sure he's taken care of, that he has what he needs to succeed." Jared looked at his mother, his eyes filled with a hope he hadn't dared to express before. He wanted this, needed it, even though he hadn't been able to say the words. Olivia, meanwhile, seemed torn between her desire to protect her pride and the undeniable reality of their situation. Ethan wasn't finished. "And finally," he continued, his voice softening, "I want to offer you a job. You taught me so much about cooking, about the art of food, and I know you still have that passion inside you. Come work with me at the Grand Cuisine. I could use someone with your skills, and it would be a way for you to get back on your feet, on your terms." The room fell silent as Olivia processed what Ethan was saying. It wasn't just a handout. He was offering her a way to reclaim her dignity, to do something she loved, while also ensuring her and Jared's future. The offer was more than generous. It was life-changing. But Olivia's hesitation lingered, her pride and independence warring with the practicality of what Ethan was offering. After what felt like an eternity, Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was softer now, laced with emotion she could no longer hide. "Ethan, I don't know what to say. It's more than I ever could have asked for." She paused, her eyes flickering with the conflict raging inside her. "But I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest and full of empathy. "You're not a burden, Olivia. You were never a burden to me. This isn't about taking advantage. This is about giving back to someone who gave me so much. I wouldn't be here without you, and now it's my turn to help. You're family, Olivia, and family takes care of each other." At that, Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears. The weight of the years of struggle, the loneliness, the pride that had kept her from asking for help, it all seemed to hit her at once. She had carried so much on her own for so long, and now, for the first time, someone was offering to share that burden. And it wasn't just anyone. It was Ethan, the boy she had once mentored, the boy who had grown into a man of success and compassion. She glanced at Jared, who was looking at her with wide, hopeful eyes, silently pleading with her to say yes. The decision wasn't just about her anymore. It was about giving Jared the life he deserved, the opportunities she had always dreamed of for him, but had never been able to provide. Slowly, she nodded, her tears spilling over as she reached for Ethan's hand across the table. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know how to repay you for this." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't need to repay me. You've already done more for me than you'll ever know." He paused for a moment, his own voice thick with emotion. "Let's just say we're even." A soft, grateful laugh escaped Olivia's lips, and she wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Jared, who had been watching the entire exchange in silence, finally spoke, his voice small but filled with relief. "Does this mean things are going to get better?" Ethan turned to Jared, his expression softening. "Yes, Jared, things are going to get better. I promise." For the first time in what seemed like years, there was a lightness in the air. The weight of uncertainty that had hung over Olivia and Jared for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope, of new possibilities. Olivia smiled at her son, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and relief. She had done her best to protect him, to hold their fragile world together, but now they had someone to help, someone who believed in them. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet, comfortable warmth. They shared more memories, more laughter, and for a brief moment, it felt like the hardships of the past were far behind them. Olivia's smile returned, and Ethan could see the spark of the woman he had once known, the mentor who had inspired him and set him on his path. Jared, too, seemed lighter, as if the heavy burden of responsibility he had carried for so long was finally being lifted from his young shoulders. As the night came to an end, Ethan stood with them at the entrance of the restaurant, watching as they prepared to leave. He handed Jared a small box of leftovers, the restaurant's famous bread and pastries tucked inside. "Take this home with you," he said with a wink, "and don't be a stranger, okay?" Jared grinned, the first real smile Ethan had seen from him all evening. "I won't. Thanks, Ethan." Olivia stepped forward, her face still glowing with gratitude. She reached out and embraced Ethan, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Ethan hugged her back, his heart full. "You'll never have to find out, Olivia. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As they walked away into the cool night, Ethan watched them with a sense of fulfillment that went beyond anything his restaurant or his success could ever give him. This, helping people, giving back to those who had shaped his life, this was what mattered. His life had come full circle, and now he was in a position to change someone else's story, just as Olivia had once changed his. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't just about the money, the accolades, or even the prestige of owning one of the best restaurants in New York. It was about human connection, about kindness, and about the power of paying it forward. Olivia and Jared's story wasn't over, it was just beginning, and Ethan was honored to be a part of their journey towards something better. As he stood at the entrance, watching them disappear into the night, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter how much success he achieved, no matter how far he went, he would always remember the importance of giving back. He would always remember that the real measure of a person's life wasn't in the money they made or the accolades they received, but in the lives they touched along the way. And as the doors of the Grand Cuisine closed behind him, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, new possibilities, and the unshakable bond of friendship and family. After that unforgettable evening at the Grand Cuisine, Olivia's story began to slowly unfold, one painful detail at a time. Ethan arranged for her to meet with a doctor he trusted, determined to get to the bottom of her health issues. It wasn't long before the full scope of her struggles became clear. Olivia had been suffering from a combination of chronic health problems, exacerbated by years of neglect and stress. The loss of her husband had been the tipping point. Grief had taken its toll not only on her emotional well-being, but on her physical health as well. Ethan sat with her during one of the early appointments, his heart heavy as he listened to the doctor explain the severity of her condition. Olivia had never fully recovered from the depression that had followed her husband's death, and that, combined with the financial strain of raising Jared alone, had made it nearly impossible for her to take care of herself. Her health had steadily declined, and by the time Ethan found her, she was battling fatigue, chronic pain, and untreated medical conditions that had left her body frail. But through it all, Olivia had fought. She had fought for Jared, doing everything she could to give him a stable life, even as her own strength faded. It was a kind of quiet heroism that Ethan deeply respected. And now, with the proper care, there was hope for her recovery. The doctors developed a treatment plan, and Olivia's health slowly began to improve. Ethan made sure she had access to the best care, and over the next few weeks, he saw the difference it made. Olivia regained some of her energy, and though the road to full recovery would be long, there was light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was no longer carrying the burden alone, and that seemed to lift her spirit as much as the medical treatment itself. During these appointments, Olivia opened up more to Ethan, revealing just how hard life had been since her husband's passing. She had worked odd jobs to keep food on the table, often going without meals herself so that Jared wouldn't have to. When her health began to decline, she could no longer work, and they had fallen into a cycle of debt and poverty that seemed impossible to escape. Every day had been a struggle to survive, and Olivia had tried her best to shield Jared from the worst of it, though Ethan knew the boy had been deeply affected by their circumstances. But despite everything, Olivia never lost her love for cooking. She spoke about the early days of her career with a wistful smile, remembering the joy she found in the kitchen, creating dishes that brought people comfort and happiness. It was a passion she had been forced to set aside in order to take care of her family. But it was still there, buried beneath years of hardship. Ethan listened intently, knowing that this part of Olivia's life, the part she had given up, was the key to her healing. She needed more than just medical treatment. She needed a purpose again, a way to reclaim the joy she had once found in her work. And that was where Ethan could help. As Olivia's health improved, Ethan introduced her to the team at the Grand Cuisine, offering her a role in the kitchen that would allow her to ease back into the culinary world without overwhelming her. At first, Olivia was hesitant. She wasn't sure if she could still handle the pressures of a busy kitchen, especially one as prestigious as Ethan's. But Ethan reassured her that she wouldn't be expected to take on too much too soon. Her role would be flexible, allowing her to rediscover her love for cooking at her own pace. The first time Olivia stepped into the kitchen at the Grand Cuisine, she looked both excited and nervous. The gleaming countertops, the high-end equipment, and the bustling energy of the staff brought back memories of her early days in the culinary world. Ethan watched as she took it all in, and he could see the flicker of passion reignite in her eyes. This was where she belonged. Slowly, Olivia began to immerse herself in the work. She started with simple tasks, helping to prep ingredients or assisting the chefs with plating. But as the days went by, she grew more confident, and it wasn't long before she began contributing her own ideas for the menu. Her years away from the kitchen hadn't dulled her instincts. and Ethan was amazed at how quickly she regained her touch. The staff at the Grande Cuisine welcomed her with open arms, respecting her experience and eager to learn from her. For Olivia, this wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. It gave her a sense of purpose and a reason to keep pushing forward, even on the days when her health made things difficult. And as she settled into her new role, her bond with Ethan grew stronger. They weren't just former mentor and student anymore. They were friends, family even, bound by a shared history and a mutual respect that went beyond their professional relationship. Jared, too, was beginning to thrive. With Ethan's help, he was able to focus on school without the constant worry of how to support his mother. Ethan made sure he had everything he needed, from school supplies to tutoring when necessary. Jared, no longer burdened by the weight of being the primary caretaker, blossomed into a bright, curious teenager with big dreams for the future. He often stopped by the restaurant after school, helping out in small ways and learning from his mother and Ethan. Though Jared had never expressed much interest in cooking before, Ethan could see the spark of curiosity in him whenever he watched his mother work. It was clear that for the first time in a long while, Jared was thinking about a future beyond just surviving. As Olivia continued to find her footing in the kitchen, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how life had come full circle. Years ago, it had been Olivia who had taken him under her wing, guiding him when he was lost and unsure of his place in the world. Now, it was Ethan's turn to do the same for her and Jared. It felt like the universe had a way of bringing people together when they needed each other the most, and Ethan was grateful for the opportunity to give back to the woman who had given him so much. The transformation in both Olivia and Jared was nothing short of miraculous. They were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to thrive. And it wasn't just because of the financial support or the medical care Ethan had provided. It was because they had been given the chance to dream again, to imagine a future where they could be happy, healthy, and whole. The restaurant staff, who had grown to adore Olivia, often remarked on the change in her. She had gone from a quiet, weary figure to a confident, creative force in the kitchen. Her contributions to the menu were quickly becoming some of the most popular dishes, and customers would often ask to meet the chef behind the creations. Olivia, ever humble, would laugh and insist that it was a team effort, but everyone knew that her touch was what made the dishes special. One evening, after a particularly busy service, Ethan and Olivia sat in the kitchen, enjoying a quiet moment after the rush. The restaurant was closed, the last of the staff had gone home, and the kitchen was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerators. "You've done it, you know," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "Done what?" Olivia asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Made this place even better than it was before. Your food, your ideas, they've brought something special to the Grande Cuisine." Olivia laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't know about that. I'm just happy to be cooking again." Ethan smiled, but there was a deeper meaning behind his words. It wasn't just about the food. It was about how far they had both come. Olivia had found her way back to the kitchen, and Jared was thriving in school, full of potential. They had come through the storm, and now there was nothing but clear skies ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. His life, once defined by his own struggles, had come full circle. The kindness that had been extended to him in his youth had shaped him into the man he was today. And now he was able to pass that kindness on to others. It wasn't just about success or money. It was about the connections he had made along the way, the people who had lifted him up, and the opportunity to do the same for those who needed it. Olivia and Jared had become more than just friends. They were family. And as they sat together in the quiet of the restaurant, laughing and reminiscing about the past, Ethan realized that this was the true measure of success. It wasn't the accolades or the awards, it was the people whose lives he had touched and who had touched his in return. The Grand Cuisine, once a symbol of Ethan's personal triumph, had become something more. It was a place of healing, of new beginnings, and of hope. And as the doors to the restaurant opened each day, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in all of their lives. A chapter filled with friendship, love, and the promise of a brighter future.